Is no longer standing alone. CNN has learned that a second person has come forward, and this second whistleblower is said to have firsthand knowledge that supports what was first laid out in the original complaint that sparked the impeachment inquiry, which would poke yet another hole right through the president's ongoing and evolving defense in all of this, and also poke a hole through his main attack line against the accusations that he pressured Ukraine to investigate a political rival, and then folks around him tried to cover it up, like this.
The whistleblower never saw the conversation. He got his information, I guess, second or third hand.
The whistleblower said terrible things about the call. But I then found out he was second hand and third hand. In other words, he didn't know what was on the call. But it was second or third hand. Never heard the call.
But now you not only have the president openly and on camera asking Ukraine and China to investigate a political rival of the president, you also have this new whistleblower who may have been on that call and has direct knowledge. Let's start there. CNN's Boris Sanchez, he's joining me now from the White House. So Boris, what are you hearing from there this morning?
Hey there, Kate. The director of the National Economic Council, Larry Kudlow, was actually answering questions just a few steps away from me moments ago, largely dismissive about questions regarding this second whistleblower. Really, that's been the posture of this White House, dismissing this second whistleblower, the second intelligence official, largely saying that they don't have any new information and that they don't have anything direct about the president and his dealings with Ukraine. Negating the reporting that we've seen through CNN and the New York Times and in other places. I want to show you this statement put out by Stephanie Grisham, the press secretary. She effectively says that these whistleblowers don't matter. She writes, quote, "It doesn't matter how many people decide to call themselves whistleblowers about the same telephone call, a call the president already made public. It doesn't change the fact that he has done nothing wrong." Important to point out, these whistleblowers, at least the first whistleblower that came forward, showed a large pattern of behavior with the president trying to affect Ukrainian policy, not just that one phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. Kate, we should also point out we're hearing from Energy Secretary Rick Perry for the first time today. There are reports out there in the Washington Post and Axios that on a call with House Republicans, the president essentially scapegoated Perry, saying that he didn't even want to have that phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, but that Rick Perry urged him to. Today, Rick Perry sort of confirmed that. Listen.
Absolutely. I asked the president multiple times, Mr. President, we think it is in the United States and in Ukraine's best interest that you and the president of Ukraine have conversations, that you discuss the options that are there. So absolutely yes.
Of course, energy and trade in energy is a huge part of the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine, so not surprising that the energy secretary would want these two leaders to speak, but it appears that Trump was not telling some of his members of his own party the full story. Of course, we've known that for weeks. Rudy Giuliani and others had been laying the groundwork with the Ukrainian leadership, essentially telling them that for a good relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine, they would have to investigate some of the president's 2020 rivals in Joe Biden and to investigate the 2016 election as well, Kate.
Yeah, absolutely. Boris, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Let's move now from the White House to Capitol Hill, where it should be yet another quiet week since the House and Senate are both on recess, of course, or absolutely not, since two key witnesses are coming before the House before House committees that are investigating impeachment. One current ambassador and one former. CNN congressional reporter Lauren Fox has the details on it. Lauren, who's coming and what do the committees want to know?
Well, Kate, it is another busy week on Capitol Hill. Gordon Sondland will come tomorrow before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as Oversight and Intelligence Committees. He's going to be talking behind closed doors. Of course, this is someone who is a major donor to the president. He also was a part of that text messaging chain that was released last week, revealing more information about what the U.S. relationship with Ukraine was like, specifically about what was going on with Ukrainian military aid that had been held up, Kate. So a lot of questions are going to be about what he knew and when. Then on Friday, Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador to Ukraine, is going to be coming before those same committees, again behind closed doors. Democrats want to know specifically why she was fired back in May. She was let go very suddenly. There is a question about whether or not that decision to let her go was politically motivated. So that's going to be a key point of questioning for Democrats on Friday. Republicans, meanwhile, holding the line, arguing that President Trump has done nothing wrong, and even as he's publicly stated that he wants China and others to investigate his political rivals, they're arguing he wasn't serious. Kate?
It was all a joking matter until it absolutely clearly wasn't. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. So joining me right now is former White House press secretary for President Clinton and CNN political commentator Joe Lockhart, former director of communications for the intelligence community, CNN national security analyst Sean Turner. Sean, let me just start with you on the second whistleblower. From your perspective, this person speaking up through, obviously not speaking up publicly, but speaking up through his attorney, does what? Because we know both of these people are members of the intelligence community, and we know that the White House is saying that no matter how many whistleblowers you have, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of really important things we could potentially get from the second whistleblower. The first thing is that you'll recall, Kate, early on that a lot of the president's supporters and the president himself made the point that the original whistleblower only had second or third hand knowledge. Well, if the reporting is correct and this whistleblower has first-hand knowledge, then we're going to get, that argument falls apart. We're going to get a first-hand understanding of what was discussed on this call. And I think that's really important, for everyone who was making the claim that this was only second-hand knowledge. They had to understand that there were going to be other people who were going to be part of this conversation and might be able to provide first-hand knowledge. The second thing I think we get that's really important is, this transcript that the White House released, there's been much said about the ellipsis in that transcript. And we really shouldn't even call it a transcript. It's much more of a summary. This new whistleblower will be able to tell us whether or not that summary of this phone call accurately reflects what was actually said between President Trump and President Zelensky in that phone call. So I think there are a couple of really important things here that we're going to get that it's going to help members of Congress understand what happened here.
And there's also an element of this, Joe, which is I almost... Someone might be able to agree with the White House that it doesn't matter how many whistleblowers come forward, only because the president himself has come forward and asked Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and has added China on top of that since this whistleblower complaint was made public. But from your perspective, what you're looking at here, where does the White House defense evolve from here?
Well, I think, Kate, you're right. In one level, it doesn't matter how many whistleblowers come forward because the president has already admitted to the underlying behavior. I think where it does matter, and where I think the White House press secretary's statement falls short, is these, whether it's whistleblowers, whether it's cabinet members that have to go in and speak and be deposed by the committee, or anyone like the ambassadors this week who will go in, they are going to fill in the blanks. They are going to articulate what the quid pro quo was, give the details, who else was involved, fill in, provide the missing puzzle pieces. So it is important. But this is not a crime, in search of a perpetrator. The president has told us that he would do it. He'd do it again. And that is ultimately going to be their defense, that it's okay for a president to leverage U.S. power to get dirt on a political opponent. That's ultimately what their position is going to be.
And that comes to the threshold question that every elected official then needs to answer is, are you okay with that, and where is your line? That gets us to Senator Ron Johnson. Sean, let me first play what he had to say on Sunday. He is the Republican chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and part of his defense, not only slamming what he would think is media bias, but he also himself attacked the intel community. Listen to what he said yesterday.
I just want the truth. The American people want the truth.
So do you not trust
Certainly,
do you not trust the FBI? You don't trust the CIA?
No,
I'm just very confused here.
Absolutely
you don't trust
not.
either
After
of those
Peter Strzok
agencies.
and Lisa Page?
Okay.
After James Comey?
You believe the FBI and the CIA,
John
these
Brennan? No, I don't
government
trust any of
agencies?
these guys in the Obama administration. I don't trust any of them.
You don't trust them now? You trust them now?
No, I didn't trust them back then.
Didn't trust him then. He doesn't trust him now. Sean, he is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. What do you say to that?
there are so many things that are wrong with what Ron Johnson said there, and I can't list them all here. But first of all, he has to understand that these individuals, these are not people who are part of the Obama administration. The men and women who make the FBI and the CIA, the fantastic and wonderful organizations that they are people, are career civil servants who have spent their entire lives, their entire careers, serving this country. And so for him to say that he doesn't trust them because they're Obama people is terribly flawed thinking. The other thing is, this is the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. If he has issues with the way that the CIA and the FBI are doing their jobs, and he needs to not only put those issues on the table, but he needs to put some evidence on the table to show that they're not doing their job consistent with the laws and rules and regulations in this country. And so far, he hasn't done that. To simply say he doesn't trust them because he has political views that are not being met is not only startling, but it's also extremely disrespectful to the men and women who have committed their lives to working for those agencies.
Yeah, and let's make sure to follow the line. I mean, this is why he doesn't trust the CIA. He says he doesn't trust the FBI. Thus, you shouldn't trust the people who are coming out with these allegations and what they're saying. Others have pointed this out, though, Joe, and it deserves repeating, that the senator not only is the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, but he has also himself voted to reauthorize FISA programs and voted in support of the Patriot Act, both of which give sweeping powers to the FBI and the CIA to surveil regular Americans. How does one square that? And what is Ron Johnson then doing? Because he knows that. He knows his vote record.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is the latest example of people putting their party over their country. Ron Johnson is the chair of this committee. He's not taken a sweeping look at our intelligence community through hearings and potential legislation. Remember, you go back to the 1970s, there were concerns about how the intelligence communities work, and there were hearings, and they were fundamentally restructured, and abuses were taken care of. But that's got nothing to do with what's going on here. Ron Johnson was told by the EU ambassador about this call and about the quid pro quo. And rather than come back to Washington and hold a hearing on this, he went and told the president that you've got a political problem here, Mr. President. So I think what's happened, in the Trump era is, among the Republican Party, particularly in the Senate, it's all about protecting the president, protecting their party, protecting their own interests, and they've completely lost touch with what the country's interests are. And that's a very dangerous position to be in when you have a president and a majority party in the Senate.
I just think,
Kate, and I would just
see,
add
Sean, go ahead, but I just see real long-term damage here. When you these blanket statements over and over again, if you don't trust them, don't trust the nameless, faceless people who are doing all of this hard work, don't trust the FBI, only trust what's coming out of my mouth. I think there is sure, this might be a political defense for right now in this moment, but this is a real moment of real long-term potential damage that can be done to these institutions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I talk with people a lot about how long it's going to take to undo the damage that's being done to our democratic institutions, and there is a lot of damage that's being done. I still go to some of these agencies and spend time catching up with colleagues, and it's a very different feel. But I just want to add another thing to what Joe said. The other thing that didn't exist back in the 60s and 70s, the way it exists today, is the whistleblower program. And so here, now you have a program that recognizes that the intelligence community has an immense amount of resources and capabilities, and you have a program within the intelligence community that's designed to make absolutely sure that people are held accountable for fraud, waste, and abuse and other mismanagement. And that very program that Congress was responsible for helping to put into place is now routinely under attack by members of Congress. So I think that Joe's right. I mean, this is just another example of putting politics over country.
Withdrawing, a sudden and huge shift for the U.S. policy in Syria. Right now, U.S. forces are leaving northern Syria following a late-night announcement from the Trump White House. And then early morning tweets, followed by early morning tweets from President Trump, like this one. It is time for us to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars, many of them tribal, and bring our soldiers home. We will fight where it is to our benefit and only fight to win. But is removing U.S. troops from there to the benefit of the United States? Quite the opposite, says one of the president's closest allies, Senator Lindsey Graham.
I expect the American president to do what's in our national security interest. And it's never in our national security interest to abandon an ally who's helped us fight ISIS. It's never in our national security interest to create conditions for the reemergence of ISIS.
Add to that, Trump's former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, tweeting this today. We must always have the backs of our allies if we expect them to have our back. The Kurds were instrumental in our successful fight against ISIS in Syria. Leaving them to die is a big mistake. Here with me now, Ian Bremmer. He's the editor-at-large for Time and president of the Eurasia Group. It's great to see you, Ian. So much to get to today. Sure. Put in perspective the impact of this decision by the president.
Well, interesting that Nikki Haley said Turkey is not our friend. They are our NATO ally, but a lot of people think they're not asking that way. It's more complicated than people are saying. The Americans are withdrawing from an area on the border.
Right on the border.
There will still be lots of American troops on the ground there. It is certainly true that the Turks have been looking to take that area so they have a place, clear it out, have a place to actually move a bunch of their refugees. They're hosting millions of Syrian refugees right now. Erdogan's under a lot of pressure. No question the Kurds are going to feel in time-honored tradition that the Americans are, again, leaving them. And the result will be, ultimately, that the Kurds will start working more closely with the Russians. But it'll take some time for that to happen.
And work closely with the Russians. The Kurds are going to have to turn and work with Assad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way their alliance is going to have to move. I mean, can this move be reversed? I ask because that's what Graham said on Fox this morning. This is what he was going to try to convince the president to do through a resolution, is to convince him to turn this back.
They've been trying for 3 years. The Pentagon and the State Department has strongly opposed the idea the Americans would pull out of this area. Trump has...
In a report in August, the Pentagon had said that this would allow for the resurgence of ISIS.
I mean, Trump, if anyone can flip-flop on a policy decision made by a tweet, President Trump is the person to be able to do it. If he doesn't, and they do pull out, there's going to be enormous pressure on Trump to expand sanctions against the Turks, especially because they've accepted that Russian missile defense system, which means that American airplanes are not going to be able to operate because they'll get that information and give it to the Russians. On both sides, the Russians are going to be in advantage here, but Turkey's going to be under a lot of pressure, and I think we should watch that.
Russia at the advantage, no matter how this turns out right now.
I think that's right.
Okay, another situation I really would like to get your take on. China and the NBA. The GM for the Houston Rockets, with a single tweet that he then deleted, but it was a tweet in support of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. That's how this began. China responds, demanding a quote-unquote correction. And the NBA gives it, essentially. I mean, let me read part of the NBA statement saying, we recognize that the views expressed by Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey have deeply offended many of our friends and fans in China, which is regrettable. I mean, this may be about offending in part. This may be about basketball in part. This is about money, but this is about freedom. This is about human rights. This is about a geopolitical mess.
Well, first of all, the statement that you just read was the English language statement. The Chinese language statement that was delivered by the NBA was actually different and much more apologetic.
What?
Believe it or not. Yeah, I know no one's advising these people, obviously, but no, it's quite something. The Chinese market is important to the NBA. They think it's their future. A lot of Chinese are really into basketball. There's a lot of money there. And so when the Chinese say, how can you possibly say this? One of your GMs supporting Hong Kong, what the NBA should have said is, hey, we do not take political stances. What he says stands for itself. I actually heard about this originally. I was talking to my friend Enes Kanter, who is the Celtics center,
right,
but is strongly anti-Erdogan in Turkey and has been very public about that because they've imprisoned his father.
But the NBA supported him.
The NBA has never had a problem with him making political statements, and he's Enes. I mean, the NBA isn't going to say we as a league don't like Erdogan, but they're not trying to muzzle their player. There is only one difference here, and the difference is Chinese cash. And South Park, for example, just shut down today in China. Why? Because the Chinese didn't like what South Park had to say about the Chinese. They're vastly more powerful economically today than they were 5-10 years ago. And American corporations, if you want to do business there, are saying, what can we do to facilitate you? And that means we're going to censor ourselves, we're going to censor our employees, and we'll fire them if there's a problem. The Americans are going to have to get used to this reality.
We shouldn't be surprised, but this really is shocking. It really is shocking. I'm going to add two more storylines to this because I want to get your take. North Korea now cutting off talks with the United States, despite the supposed friendship. After talks this weekend, despite the supposed friendship between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, North Korea says that talks aren't worth it at this moment. And then there's also this tweet from the Russian embassy in the UK, tweeting out reporting from the Washington Post that Donald Trump told Theresa May that he's skeptical of the intelligence that Russia was behind the attempted murder and poisoning of a former Russian spy on British soil last year. I put these together because just taking a step back out for a second, add it all up, what does this say about U.S. foreign policy right now?
Well, U.S. foreign policy on North Korea is no more successful under Trump than it has been under previous presidents. You know, you've never been able to move them on
and love letters didn't do anything. And
love letters
fire
didn't do
and
anything.
did
They are not testing ICBMs. Clearly, if they start doing that was the red line. It's going to be hard for Trump to stay. I'm still happy with him. I want to engage. But for now, we've got to freeze on the talks. They've said maybe we'll get back by the end of the year. We'll see. On the Russian story, the Russians know good propaganda value when they see it. And the fact that it came out that Trump was telling Theresa May, hey, I don't believe your intelligence that the Russians were behind the assassination of this former agent, Yuri Skripal, the Russians were like, hey, see? Trump didn't believe it. So obviously, we're clean, we're clear. I mean, that's not a special relationship, let's put it that way, at least not between the Americans and the UK.
To say the very least.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. It's really good to have you here always. Coming up for us, many Republicans are responding to House Democrats, their impeachment inquiry. And how are they responding? Simple. One Republican taking a very different approach right now, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, running head on into it and putting money behind it with new ads on Facebook. Watch this.
Nancy Pelosi's in the clutches of a left-wing mob. They finally convinced her to impeach the president. All of you know your Constitution. The way that impeachment stops is when a Senate majority with me as...
Where are the rest of the Republicans in the Senate right now? Here with me now is CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel, CNN political director David Chalian. Jamie, they're definitely not talking publicly, most Republicans, but what are you hearing from Republicans privately about impeachment and maybe specifically what the emergence of another whistleblower, a second person to come forward, has it changed anything?
Well, I like to say they're looking for a bigger desk to hide under. Absolutely, it changes. And we heard one lawyer say they are representing multiple whistleblowers. Right. The Republicans don't know what's coming next. And Nancy Pelosi has also very carefully, by not having this vote, kept a lot of information away from them. There's also what they told me over the weekend from Republicans in both the House and Senate, Trump exhaustion. They are, they don't, many of them consider him a true Republican. They are worried about the economy.
And says my party is...
One said, it's not like we're defending Ronald Reagan. So there's a very wait and see.
So, David, you have Ron Johnson, what we talked about. I talked about Ron Johnson a little bit earlier, but the gymnastics that is required here to stand with the president is something to see. I mean, it's now... What we saw yesterday was don't believe what you see and don't believe what you're actually hearing from some folks.
I mean, when Jamie's saying they don't know what's coming next, true, but they do know what is already in the public domain. They can read the transcript of the call, and it's, as Mike Turner, the Republican of Ohio, said, this is not okay, Mr. President. Now, he may not be on board with impeachment, but at least he's saying this is not okay. We're not even hearing that from many Republicans. In fact, the defense is a little bit all over the map. You know, there's not one clear road, whether Marco Rubio suggests something as a joke or Roy Blunt suggests something as a joke, or as you said, Ron Johnson going a bit more into the conspiracy hole. What I think Republicans are facing, and you are right, Mitch McConnell's not wrong with his strategy there. Right. He is absolutely right to say, hey, I am, and our Senate majority is what is going to stop this president being removed from office. You need to vote us back in. That is where the party is. There's no doubt about that. But as Tucker Carlson sort of laid out for Republicans, can't you keep your principles and say this is wrong and it's not impeachable, but they can't do that because President Trump doesn't believe it's wrong. And so they would be in a different place than the president who says it's a perfect call.
And the place that those who have spoken out have gotten to already, they can't go, I mean, you can always try to go back, but they've already dug themselves into this. They can't go back and say, oh, it is bad, but it's not something that I'd like to impeach. I guess, is their bottom line the threshold question? Are you hearing from Republicans what they are watching for, waiting for, or saying that how much is too much and what that is?
So let's go with the watching word first, the thing I heard over the weekend. Watch the polls, watch the polls, watch the polls. They're waiting to see, will voters, will the MAGA base stay with him? Yes. But maybe not some of the Republicans and independents they need. Yeah. Will there be a shift? That's what they're waiting for.
I do think that what you have here is a loyalty to the president, but they have to start thinking about what is the party? Where does it stand? And that's what you hear when you talk to Republicans. They feel they've lost a sense of that. They understand that they are entirely the party of Donald Trump right now. And that's sort of, they've put their lot with him, and that's where they are. And you say, the MAGA folks, remember, the great majority of these members rely on those folks turning out and their turnout being supercharged in order to win primaries and then get reelected in the fall.
As one Republican told me, the only election that everyone is focused on right now, it's their primary. It's their primary when you're looking at that. Let's see what happens today. A federal judge has dismissed President Trump's lawsuit to block an effort to get his tax returns in New York. The judge saying just this morning that the president's claim of immunity from any kind of criminal process, quote, would constitute an overreach of executive power. The president filed the lawsuit after Manhattan's district attorney subpoenaed his accounting firm for his tax returns and related documents going back to 2011. The DA is investigating whether the Trump organization violated any state laws. An attorney for the president has already filed an appeal. So that is ongoing. All of that is also going on in New York, while back in Washington, the president is facing the fast-moving impeachment inquiry in Congress. 2 key witnesses named in the whistleblower complaint heading to Capitol Hill this week. For more on that, joining me here is Democratic Congressman Greg Meeks of New York. He sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Good being with you.
I do know that you want to see the president's tax returns, so I'm going to move on from that because I want to ask you about impeachment. 2 key witnesses coming before your committee and others this week. Gordon Sondland was on a lot of those text messages that we've seen so far publicly. That is getting a lot of attention. What do you want to ask him?
Well, I want to find out because I used to be a prosecutor, and when you look at it, to me, it seems as though they were having a conversation via text or email. Mm-hmm. Then one party did not like the way it was going. Says, call me. 5 hours gone by. What took place in that 5 hours? Were there further conversation in that 5 hours? Once that was done and completed that 5 hours, they then repeated the scenario where you had another statement that tried to exculpate the president in the position. Mm-hmm. So I am concerned about that we are undergoing right now a cover-up by individuals who are close to the president or in the president's administration. And I want to know what took place, when, how, what the timing is, because I think that's very important.
And he could provide a lot of that information, considering when you see his placement in these conversations and those text messages. And then you also have the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. She's going to be coming in as well later this week. She was pushed out kind of in the midst of all of this going on. What do you want to ask her?
Well, you know what? We've already seen that the president pushed her out and have used describing her language that would seem to make her seem as though she was not patriotic. So I want to know what was taking place, what was the relationship she had with the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian government, and what was the administration trying to get her to do that maybe she didn't really want to do. Because what we're finding out now by many of the individuals within the State Department, and that's why a number of them have either resigned in the past or are starting to step up and speak out, being compelled to do something when they are in fact patriots of the United States and will stand up and tell the truth. And I think that's what's taking place now.
So that's coming up this week. Friday was already a deadline for the Secretary of State to comply with requests for documents. That didn't happen. What is the committee going to do about this now? Like, what are the steps now?
Here's the steps. Either they cooperate or they're not.
So you give them more time.
So they're going to subpoena, and once we subpoena, or if they don't cooperate, we hold them in contempt. And if that continues, then you also look at it as additional articles to consider for impeachment in regards to the obstruction of Congress being able to do its work.
So, Congressman, the White House has said that they're not going to comply with the president specifically has said he's not going to comply with anything until the House holds this floor vote to open the impeachment inquiry. I understand that it is not understood to not be required under the Constitution, but that vote has been held at the beginning of the last two presidential impeachment inquiries. Why not hold that vote?
We're not going to allow the individual who is the subject to this investigation to tell us how to investigate.
But that's how it was done in the past.
And this time, Nancy Pelosi has been very clear, and I agree with her, that we're going to get all of the information. You know, generally, in a regular process, the grand jury doesn't go and hold a vote.
This isn't a regular grand jury
I agree,
process?
but I'm just talking about the logic of it. The logic of it is to get all of the information so that we know, give the other side a chance to refutate it also.
Are you concerned what the vote total would show? What it would mean for vulnerable Democrats holding that vote now?
Well, no, because what you would see right now, leaning for the inquiry, you have over 218 now. And I think what everyone is saying is, though, we want to give individuals the opportunity to, if you've got something to say that's going to contradict this, you have that opportunity to bring it forward.
But if you're just being candid, then, is the not holding the vote, is it about not wanting to give Republicans or the president more control over the process, which, depending on how it's written and how the vote would go down, that's what it would do?
What you will see take place is not going to take a long time. In an expedited manner, we're going to do our work. The three committees are working now. And we will find out whether or not the administration is going to cooperate or not. But don't expect this to be stretched out for a long period of time. There will come a time where there has to be a vote, and that will happen. But it will happen as we complete our work, and I don't think that it will take a long period of time to get there.
All right. Yet